You don't have to look very hard to uncover the general consensus that Mass Effect 2 is widely regarded as the best in the trilogy. It, in my mind, always has been and always will be a fantastic game. For the longest time, I even shared the perspective that Mass Effect 2 was the idiomatic dog's nadgers, but since the remasters, a perspective-altering event where you could suddenly play all 3 games back to back with no break, boasting many a quality of life improvement to my beloved Mass Effect 1, I've been finding it increasingly difficult to cling to the sentiment that the middle game is where Mass Effect is most itself. It's lovable in 1,000 ways and furthers this fascinating galaxy BioWare took such great care to establish in the first game, but what it very apparently doesn't do so well was tap into precisely what it was about how Mass Effect 1 presented itself that distinguished it from just another sci-fi series. It did a great job at riding that magic, perhaps even expanding it, and implementing a tincture of wonder of its own. But the game is vastly different from art direction to layout and how the game plays, both as an action experience and as an exploration of the cold, endless emptiness of space. Now, some of those alterations are for the better, but others, if we're being entirely honest, just aren't. As you can imagine, my views on Mass Effect 2 are complex. It's a game worthy of replaying 100 times over, but I'm also sobering up to the realization that it's a very weird sequel. It might be the character-driven meat of the Mass Effect sandwich, but it's also a nonsensical continuation of Mass Effect 1's story minus all of its momentum, where Commander Shepard joins a terrorist organization and embarks on a glorified side quest while firing probes at every planet in the galaxy. All while the actual overarching plot of the trilogy is serviced by a DLC that is nothing short of dreadful. As for the stylistic choices that set Mass Effect 1 apart, I'm not saying they're all gone in Mass Effect 2, but what is missing is noticeable. Furthermore, there are many aspects to Mass Effect 2 that serve it just fine, if not amazingly, but ultimately boxed Mass Effect 3 into a corner it didn't want to be in. Nevertheless, if you're looking for memorable moments and great characters, then Mass Effect 2 has the lion's share. This video is not intended to be a wipeout where I come to the conclusion that I suddenly hate a game I once loved. That would be as unfair as it is inaccurate. Simply put, I've never satisfyingly critically viewed Mass Effect 2, and that's what this video ultimately is. It's a revisit where I hope I'll be able to encapsulate what I love about this game just as much as what it turns out I don't. So grab yourselves a brew, perhaps some snacks, and let's dive into Mass Effect 2. The best place to start, as is usually the case with everything, is the beginning. The events of Mass Effect 1 are obviously concluded, and Commander Shepard has successfully proven the existence of the Reapers and the threat they pose to all organic life in the galaxy. We pick up with Shepard 1 month later, where the crew of the SSV Normandy are out searching for the remnants of the Geth. Morale aboard the Normandy is high. We've just thwarted Saren and proven that Reapers can be defeated. However, that's about to change as Mass Effect 2 takes an atomic approach to wiping the slate clean. We are treated to a hilariously absurd blockbuster introduction. The Normandy is attacked by a mysterious ship and virtually ripped in half immediately, forcing the crew to evacuate. As for Commander Shepard, well, who better to be the hero than the player character? Basically, Joker's a stubborn git who believes he can save this desperately lost ship, so we're gonna have to go and fetch him. It's a dramatic sequence that sees this ship we spent an entire game getting attached to, this hub area, this safe space, utterly decimated right away, leaving a massive gaping hole where the CIC once was. It's as impressive as it is shocking, but we've not got to the ridiculous bit yet. In saving Joker, Shepard is launched clear of the Normandy, giving us front row seats to its total destruction. However, there's a leak in his suit, so we watch the man suffocate while simultaneously being exposed to the vacuum of space before entering a planet's atmosphere and burning up. And that is the introduction we get. Commander Shepard suffers a painful and absolute death With regards to hitting you in the jaw at 100 miles an hour, Mass Effect 2's introduction is a 10 out of 10. At the same time, it's a bit much. How do you claw yourself back from that? Well, as it turns out, immediately. I deliberately omitted that before we bore witness to the total destruction of the iconic SSV Normandy, and then the death of Commander Shepard followed by the total destruction of Commander Shepard's remains, we're exposed to a peculiar conversation between two characters we're yet to meet, Miranda and the Elusive Man, who basically summarise that in the war against the Reapers, Commander Shepard is fundamentally essential and must be preserved at any cost. It's somewhat funny the next scene is watching Shepard die, but the scene after that is Miranda, presumably under the Elusive Man's orders, resurrecting Shepard? As much as I would like to know what part of Shepard they recovered, and how they knew they were in fact resurrecting Commander Shepard and not accidentally resurrecting Navigator Presley, rest in peace my goat, poking holes in pseudoscientific fantasy isn't a battle you're going to win. That being said, this death and subsequent immediate resurrection is indicative of a massive shift in philosophy. If Mass Effect 1 introduces you to its world, its characters, and its themes with scalpel precision, this, comparatively, is a rocket launcher. We're hard resetting the universe. Resurrecting Shepard understandably takes time. Its absurdity most definitely takes a backseat to its purpose. And that is so we can touch base with the Mass Effect universe a couple of years down the line, so consequences from the first game can truly take hold, and characters can develop in Shepard's absence. However, this is the gold standard of utterly nuclear ways to achieve that. It gets the job done, but it's overkill. Literally. The bizarre circumstances of Shepard's death aside, we finally come to, a couple of years later in 2185, to a galactic landscape that has experienced the past 2 years without us. We have no idea where any of our crew are, or even who actually survived the destruction of the SSV Normandy, finding ourselves in a strange facility that is under attack. We're forced to fight through a series of mechs while we figure out what the bloody hell just happened, where we meet great and interesting new characters such as Jacob Taylor and Wilson, Mass Effect 2's greatest never mind, there he goes. And long story short, we owe credit for the medical miracle of necromancy, albeit with the facade of science, to a lovely organisation of humanitarians named Cerberus, who want to recruit us for a mission. We can choose to either trust them or distrust them, but this is a fundamental story beat. We don't get a say. You may remember the occasional run-in with Cerberus in the side content of Mass Effect 1. They are a human-centric terrorist organization. And that isn't exactly open to interpretation. We are the ones dealing with a lot of their messes. And if we choose the sole survivor background, we learn that they were the ones behind what happened to our unit on Akuz, giving us more reason to hate them than most, as if being brought back from the dead to be recruited by the Space IRA wasn't crazy enough. The Elusive Man, the boss of the Space IRA, voiced by Martin Sheen, wants to recruit us for a mission to investigate the disappearances of human colonies across the galaxy, which is, to be fair, something Shepard would care to look into. So within the isolation of Mass Effect 2, Shepard begrudgingly aligning with Cerberus momentarily to investigate these disappearances makes sense. However, its intent to create an air of nuance around Cerberus does fall flat on its face. We have witnessed and engaged with their shenanigans firsthand. They murdered my boy Kahoku. That warrants a tad more escalation than an aloof workplace relationship. There is no reason why Shepard would want a long-standing partnership with Cerberus. The Elusive Man simply states that he believes the Reapers might be involved, and Shepard goes, "Reapers? Not on my watch," and the game then has to engineer a reason why nobody else cares. And you'd think surely if the Reapers are involved it would be a priority of the Council. After all, we spent the entirety of the last game proving the existence of the Reapers beyond reasonable doubt. One even attacked the Citadel. So it should be logically as simple as Cerberus brought us back from the dead for some reason, thanks mate. Verify that entire colonies are being abducted by strange bug people called Collectors, who may or may not be involved with the Reapers. Take the shiny new Normandy 2 that Cerberus has been building in secret, and take this valuable intelligence right back to the Council to get stuck into the fight once more. If only it were that easy. The Council have reverted to being beta Reaper deniers.
Ah yes, Reapers.
And Anderson understandably doesn't trust us because we arrived flying the colours of a terrorist organisation. Commander Shepard from the Council's perspective must be a experience. The guy was functionally a diversity hire on their part. However, he claims to have visions and leveled accusations against their best Spectre, Saren, whom he chases across the galaxy and becomes a doomsday prophet in the process. He might have saved the day and been proven right, about Saren at least, but he wouldn't shut up about these Reapers, so they fobbed him off onto the endless task of hunting down Geth, only to be brutally killed in action to waltz into a meeting 2 years later, having realigned himself with a human-first terror organisation. Considering there's no long-standing concrete evidence of the Reapers, Vigil was destroyed, and the ship Sovereign being a Reaper is a tough pill to swallow when it's perhaps easier to come to the belief that it's just a massive Geth ship. It isn't tough to believe that under those circumstances, when you take into consideration the further fact the Reapers haven't showed up in the 2 years since all that, the Council are apprehensive to believe Commander Shepard's doomsday prophecies. Based on the information we're meant to believe is available to them, the Council is acting rather rationally, if anything. What isn't especially rational are the evidence-gathering techniques of the late 22nd century. What do you mean the evidence blew up? Are we to believe that Shepard chased Saren across the galaxy knowing the Council would want evidence of the Reaper threat without sparing a solitary thought to using a body cam? It's not like they don't exist in this universe. The problem I've come to have with the Council's demeanor towards Shepard and cavalier attitude towards the Reapers in Mass Effect 2 isn't the idea that they still don't believe they exist, even if Mass Effect 1 was in part a mission to prove the Reapers exist, alongside stopping Saren from bringing them back, a big part that led to a big payoff that this now undermines. My problem is that problem could have been resolved with the use of ubiquitous technology, and cameras can be tiny. They could be tiny back when Mass Effect 1 released. You could easily say it was always there without mentioning it at all in Mass Effect 1. But of course, that's not the purpose of the Council continuously shooting us down. This game's plot only works if Commander Shepard is pushed to work with Cerberus. And in fairness, one of Mass Effect 3's DLCs will go on to retcon that the Council aren't being entirely straight with us for understandable reasons, presumably the surprise terrorist connections, and they do actually believe the Reapers are real. But they don't want to spread mass panic because that helps nobody, and they don't trust us enough to loop us in. I mean, Cerberus is an avowed enemy of the Council after all. Our death and subsequent resurrection is an act of treason. They could in theory arrest us for aligning with Cerberus, and probably should, so instead they reinstate our Spectre status, which if you're familiar with Mass Effect at all, you know means we just got given umbrella legal immunity. When you think about it, this narrative relying on a Cerberus angle is quite messy. Nevertheless, it does serve its function. As funny and over the top as it is, Shepard being killed in some absurd fashion and then reassembled allows for time to pass, it allows for characters to move on, it allows for the very galaxy to move on. The destruction of the Normandy allows for a new and improved version. After all, this is a hub area you're going to be spending plenty of time. It helps a bit if it's novel. As for aligning ourselves with an extremist faction simply because nobody else seems to care, that severs the strings and allows Mass Effect 2 to explore what it wants to, a very different side to the galaxy. While the method used to get it is relatively crude, the result is actually one of this game's strengths. So it's not as easy as condemning the opening for how daft it is. There are strong points too, many of which the opening exists to set up, but one that shows profoundly during the intro and continues across the entire game is the heavier blockbuster focus. The visuals are way more cinematic, primarily in but also outside of cutscenes and dialogue, which is so much neater and more flavourful than an over-reliance on over-the-shoulder angles, which of course there is always going to be a place for. The injection of this variety allows for more sense of occasion. Conversations with the elusive man evoke a genuine sense of mystery, not necessarily entirely through his dialogue, but through the scene that's crafted to convey his shadowiness. His minimalist, reflective office has a massive window yielding front row seats to a dying star. It's murky and its light envelops him in a thick contrast. The game's opening establishes a precedent of high density, with these impressive and stylish cinematics, and the rest of the game delivers. That within itself brings the events more to life. It gives you something to get lost in and get hyped for the adventure you're about to undertake. Mass Effect 1 might have had moments of this flair, and my god did they hit hard, but by comparison, 2 is an aesthetic epic, and it wastes absolutely no time letting you know. Another thing it wastes no time establishing with the player is its fantastic score. The music in this game is insanely good. I think you could make that argument for Mass Effect 1 and 3, and maybe even Andromeda as well. If I had to choose, I'd take the rich Blade Runner inspired synths of Mass Effect 1 any day, but 2's score works unbelievably well and complements the visuals. That again helps to suck you in at the earliest possible opportunity. As it turns out, you can put up with a load of bollocks when the vibes are in. Mass Effect 2 lacks for neither. But it's like I said, this is a game that struggles with forward momentum. Eventually that is going to get picked up on. It can be a flashy cinematic audible masterclass, but logging to a stall would still be a bad thing. And I think the vast majority of Mass Effect fans, including myself, are very fond of what Mass Effect 2 prioritizes to address this. To reiterate, the main antagonists of Mass Effect 2 are not the Reapers. They kind of are, but they're not present, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Instead, we have a Reaper proxy, the Collectors, a mysterious insectoid-looking species that, for reasons unbeknownst to us at the start of the story, but it's Mass Effect 2, it's probably the Reapers, are abducting entire populations of human colonies. They're a mysterious alien race hailing from somewhere beyond the Omega-4 relay, which is a mass relay, but instead of blue, it's red. So we have 2 objectives: to figure out why they're abducting humans and stop them. For that, we're going to need a team of all-stars willing to risk it all to brave a jaunt through the Omega-4 relay, and so begins the vast majority of the story. Withdraw that, taking into consideration the beats of the story, Mass Effect 2 is short and unsophisticated. Some would even label it filler end to end, and I can't lie, it does feel like one really long side quest. It does have some long-term consequence, but I don't think it's very good at advertising it. What I'm trying to say though is the team building process is what fills this story out and gives it soul. Up to a point, we have to engage with it. We can't just go hopping mission to mission like we could in Mass Effect 1, but the ceiling for it becoming dictated by player choice is reasonably low. In Mass Effect 1, we have 6 squad mates, with whom we have limited discretion over who we can recruit, and then across the playthrough it's up to us to what extent we interact with them and expire their dialogue. Mass Effect 2, including DLC, features 12 squad mates, and not only does it double the pool of friends, it also seeks to deepen those relationships. This is the character-driven heart of the trilogy, and that's a title I can get behind. Quantity, however, is not indicative of quality. So how does Mass Effect 2 improve upon Mass Effect 1's character work? To begin with, recruitment no longer occurs in passing. In Mass Effect 1, barring Liara, you picked up your squad mates either en route or as a means to achieve a particular objective. And considering the modesty of the character pool, it doesn't become notably pervasive. It is primarily localized to the opening few hours of the game, and isn't remotely time-consuming to do. Mass Effect 2 has double the characters to throw our way, and building up a squad to do the impossible is far more dominant in the plot. There's no picking up new friends in passing, like stopping through the Mackey's drive-thru on the way back from Big Tesco, aside of course from Miranda and Jacob, whom we have from the beginning as our default squad. And of course the DLC characters Zaid and Kasumi, who each join up after a brief conversation because, outside their individual loyalty missions, they are drones at the best of times. That leaves us with 8 open slots, each of whom has a recruitment mission. I wouldn't go so far as saying that means we have to go out of our way to fetch them. For a lot of them, it is our way, but it casts the feeling that we're going out of our way to recruit these individuals, and this takes us across the galaxy to an interesting variety of places to meet an interesting series of people, both new and old. So while it's considerably faster paced than Mass Effect 1's approach to storytelling, Mass Effect 2's characters give it a very episodic nature. We can see so much of this galaxy, but it is a more flying visit than we might be used to. This is demonstrated best in its series of hub areas. In Mass Effect 1, we had the Normandy. The Citadel was mostly docile, and I suppose could, to a point, be classified as such, but it's quite sprawling and is meant to be explored at length. In Mass Effect 2, we have various hubs. Omega is practically the dark evil Citadel. It's the trade capital of the Terminus systems, an entire city built into a hollowed-out asteroid, more or less governed out of a strip club. Crime is high here. This is where people go to either seek opportunity or be forgotten. It has no official government. Instead, it's ruled with an iron fist by Arya T'Loak, who keeps the gangs and mercenaries in check. This is the perfect place for the actions of the vigilante known as Archangel. Garrus is out here just trying to find his place and hoping to do some good in the galaxy. The other recruit we can pick up here is Dr. Morden Solus, a Solarian scientist running a clinic out of one of Omega's many districts, the streets of which we fight our way through to find him, both giving us an insight into why the character is where we find them, and making Omega feel far bigger and more expansive than it actually is. The area we can actually freely explore upon arrival is dismally small. It's just big enough to create an atmosphere, but primarily exists to give you 3 or 4 shops. That alone would be disappointing, but it branches out into mission-specific areas that cast an illusion that Omega is much bigger, that there's far more going on. This approach, cast across an entire game, requires plentiful missions to land. Each location like this needs just enough content springboarding off of what can be explored to make you feel as if this is an actual lived-in, built-up, highly densely populated area. The Citadel, I suppose, is another hub area like this. It needs no introduction at this point. It is the beating heart of Council space, but this early it's easier to see the cracks in. Its branching missions occur far later in the story, and we have the far more explorable urbanscape of Mass Effect 1 to compare it to. In that game, it was just about big enough to get lost in, however briefly, and already demonstrated Mass Effect's ability to make something feel bigger than it actually is. Mass Effect 2's take on the Citadel is 3 stories of a ward, just about big enough to fit a few shops, the Human Counselor's office and a boozer. It does its job and the views are spectacular, but it's a lot easier to be underwhelmed by. We have a superior prior experience of this location, and like I said, any episodic missions that might expand it you have to work a bit harder for, so for a while it is just a shopping centre. Then there's Ilium, our first planetary urbanscape. I like to jokingly refer to it as Purple Coruscant for obvious reasons. This is the shady fringe of Asari space, where regulations are relaxed and corporations are reasonably free to churn out profits. Unlike Noveria in Mass Effect 1, it has an air of disingenuous friendliness. Rather than the standoffish cold welcome we received on the colder planet of Noveria, here we're greeted quite warmly, but we're quickly made aware that it's just as dangerous. Again, the actual area we can freely visit is small, but the views of the city stretching as far as the eye can see in every direction help make it feel massive. Furthermore, there are plenty of details to highlight. This is where the veil between the Asari's squeaky clean facade and their shady dealings is finest. It stands to reason then this is where we'd recruit an assassin killing a corrupt CEO, I suppose, or indeed an Asari Justicar mercilessly hunting a dangerous criminal. The recruitment phase is a big part of how Mass Effect 2 continues the first game's world building. The environment tells us something about the characters we meet there, and the characters we meet there tell us something about where we are. This extends beyond the recruitment missions that spiral off of these hub areas. To recruit a Krogan warlord, we find ourselves in a mercenary-infested starship graveyard, somewhere away from prying eyes, where we discover the guy is creating tank-bred Krogan, in a bid to create a pure Krogan, something Citadel Space would understandably not be too eager for.
Ultimately, we don't get to recruit this guy, but we do get to recruit his pure soldier. Although it's up to us if we want to let him out of the freezer. Recruiting the convict takes us to a prison ship called Purgatory, an abusive facility run by mercenaries doubling up as an extortion racket. It's got a better ring to it than HMP Wandsworth, I'll give you that, but considering this institution is run on corruption, the name Purgatory is a tad on the nose. No matter it houses the most twisted, cruel and violent criminals in the galaxy. It would make sense this is where we'd meet somebody known to us as the Convict. I'm not entirely sure why we would want to recruit someone from this place, considering mass murder is basically small time here, but in recruiting the Convict Jack and every conversation that follows, we learn that this prison ship is a less than ideal solution for the galaxy's criminals. And as such, we don't feel bad for having to shut the place down.
Then there's Tally, who of course, being a post-pilgrimage Quarian, isn't going to be nearby to anywhere with easy transport links. Sure enough, we find her more or less on the edge of the galaxy, on a planet investigating the side effects of some peculiar solar activity, and who could forget the fighting Geth bit. This entire thing tells us a lot about how far Tally's come in the past 2 years, and now she's out here actively aiding her people in their fight against their own AI creations. There is one more squad mate, but that one comes in very late, so for now we're going to exclude them. As you can tell, the recruitment process is a multifaceted learning experience, not just of the characters themselves, the environments we find ourselves in to find them, and the lore it's feeding out of and into. And this continues with these characters in conversation aboard the Normandy. As I'll no doubt get into, the quality of the characters themselves does vary somewhat, but they are an efficient world-building method. We have assembled a crew of individuals from all corners of the galaxy, from all walks of life, provided they're capable of violence, and that means we get insight into quite a fair bit. Mass Effect 2 doesn't bog itself down with feeding us the lore we already know from Mass Effect 1. It's more interested in expanding that knowledge. Each character in their own way, be it the 400 years experienced Asari Justicar, the very model of a scientist Solarian, the morally righteous human soldier who somehow bewilderingly got radicalized, the surprisingly thoughtful Drell suit for hire, or even the basically newborn tank-bred Krogan, who according to the Layer of the Shadow Broker DLC spends his free time googling dinosaurs, has something new to tell us, and it's typically multiple somethings. This paints a vivid picture of parts of the Mass Effect universe we haven't covered yet. As such, it's unbelievably valuable in upholding the feeling that this fictional universe is alive, and the squad mates themselves are only part of this puzzle. Aboard the Normandy, there are other characters who fulfill this insightful function. Take, for instance, Yeoman Kelly Chambers, who's well studied and gives us a third-person perspective on some of the conversations we might have had, or Joker, the Normandy's wisecracking helmsman, currently navigating the dynamic of sharing his bridge with Edie, the ship's onboard AI. And Edie is a fascinating character. More so in Mass Effect 3 than here, but overall across both games we watch her learn. After all, she's alive, and that's not something we get to do with previous instances of artificial intelligence. In Mass Effect 1 we're exposed to plenty of Geth as they mindlessly follow Sovereign, and any other instances of artificial intelligence we do meet has already well and truly gone off the deep end. Edie then is both proof and foreshadowing that there's more to AI than going loopy and trying to kill organics, even if the machine-to-person transition is a journey. To bring things back to the squad exclusively, it's not just about what they can teach us about the world we find ourselves in, but also about them as individuals, and like I said before, some characters are better than others. Grunt, for instance, doesn't understand his own insight. He has information imprinted on his brain from his time in the tank, so combine infant naivety with violence and yeah, that kind of sums him up. He is amusing and you can discern information from him, but the conversation isn't eloquent. Another companion who suffers a bit in Mass Effect 2 is Garrus. I hate to say it, I'm a Garrus defender and I'm not arguing about quality. Learning about what he's been up to in the 2 years between Mass Effect 1 and Mass Effect 2 is great. Having a familiar face around is reassuring. And seeing how this character has changed is satisfying considering the potency of the influence we have on him. Garrus's problem in Mass Effect 2 is how shallow his dialogue tree actually is. He has all the makings of one of the most interesting characters in the game, but more than half the times you go to speak to him, he tells you to f*** off.
Can it wait for a bit? I'm in the middle of some calibrations.
It's a good job he makes up for that with a compelling arc. As for the more fascinating of the new faces, we have a few. Mordin being the obvious name to point to. He's an eccentric yet brilliant geneticist who has done some things in the past that he defends but a Paragon Shepherd might object to, for instance altering the Krogan genophage to ensure Krogan don't adapt to it, justifying these actions by claiming they were necessary, something the reality of his arc forces him to confront. Beyond that, he's a rapid, rambling, quirky individual with a very colourful past. But what makes Mordin so interesting is the fact that he stands out among Solarians. His speech and thinking are so rapid he feels more like he belongs to a species as fast-lived as the Solarians. And that's an aspect of the species the vast majority don't communicate very well. Considering being fast-lived and fast-paced is enshrined in the lore, the vast majority of Solarians can be kept up with way too easily. This is the first and probably one of the only instances where I actually felt I had to work to keep up. Of course, that fast-paced dialogue means Mordin naturally has more to say, which makes him one of the deepest and most interesting characters in the game besides, so as you can imagine, he's quite a fondly remembered character. Another character I'm very fond of is Samara, the wise Asari Justicar. A new concept to the Mass Effect universe at this point, and a Justicar is essentially an ancient warrior monk, seldom seen outside of Asari space. She lives by a philosophy where every deed is either right or wrong, there's no room for grey. You'd think that would make her idealistic or even naive, but actually, she speaks with a cold, even somewhat unsettling cadence. She might be a steadfast defender of the needy, but she's also a ruthless killer of the wicked, a trait we observe right away when we meet her. And as we observe, she has no compunctions killing anyone that gets in her way. She might be righteous, but she's also terrifying, which provides you all the insight you need into the type of evil that exists to necessitate her. As such, her arc is very much so tied to that, but we'll get into that shortly. Then there's Thane Krios, the resident assassin. Not only are we introduced to an entirely new species, Thane provides insight on an entirely new way of thinking. You would expect him to be a ruthless killer. Instead, we're faced with a deeply pious and thoughtful individual. He's also dying, which gives him perspective and explains why he'd join a mission such as this. He's on an all too familiar arc of redemption. Each character, from the very best to the least best, has an arc. They have a reason for being here, something motivating them, driving them to risk their lives on a high-stakes mission. So there isn't a single squad mate who isn't interesting, and that even goes for Jacob, one of Mass Effect's most hated characters. Anyway, the question becomes, how are these arcs explored? For that, we're going to have to look at the natural progression of the story. Mass Effect 2 tells its story on its own time. This means you cannot just go main mission to main mission. Basically, I'm not entirely sure how somebody's managed to speedrun this game in under an hour. That's a gaming session dedicated to white monster and self-loathing if ever I've seen one. How it works at the start of the game is you complete the introduction missions and then you're sent out to recruit characters. After you've recruited a certain sum, the next time you approach the CIC, Kelly Chambers will let you know the elusive man wants a chat. The game at this point will lock you out of using the navigation console and you'll be forced to hear out what the elusive man wants. The first time this happens, we're sent to Horizon, which is currently under attack by the Collectors abducting human colonists, locking us into that mission whether we like it or not. Long story short, this is where we confirm the Collectors are intentionally targeting humans, and also serves as our first confrontation with them. It's kind of baffling that we already have defensive measures against their Seeker swarms, which are basically swarms of bugs they use to paralyze the colonists so they can't escape. Where did Mordin get this thing? I digress, this mission also serves as our reunion with whoever survived Vermeer. If you recall, in Mass Effect 1, either Ashley or Kaidan gets blown up by a nuclear bomb, and in Mass Effect 2 we come face to face with whoever survived that choice, playing deeper into the character-driven heart of the game. Anyway, to cut a long story short, whoever it is will bollock us for joining Cerberus,
And the Paragon option is to turn Shepard into a gaslighting Cerberus apologist. I'm not trying to get bogged down with this point. Basically, the character who didn't get nuked will chastise us a bit and then leave for the rest of the game. Big takeaway is the trip through the Omega-4 relay to the Collector homeworld is now a necessity. Considering the high likelihood of casualties on that mission, we're advised to help our crew get their affairs in order. After this point, our crew might have requests for us. The loyalty missions will begin to creep in. Now, loyalty missions were something Mass Effect 1 flirted with but didn't really have. Sure, you could help Garrus track down Dr. Hart, a depraved Solarian organ trafficker. You could give Tali some data and help Rex track down his family armor by passing a pivotal skill check in the plot, but it was by no means a uniform thing. As such, its impact was left ambiguous. Squad loyalty isn't really a thing. Half the squad don't even ask us to go on a detour for anything. It isn't a tracked value, it's an event. And even then, only one of them might tip the scales of a playthrough. In Mass Effect 2, squad loyalty is a tracked value, and it's clear that it's important, even if mostly in hindsight. What will happen is after a bit of time has passed with a certain squad mate knocking around, a few missions have gone by, they will ask for our help. We'll be issued a one-time mission we'll carry out with the squad mate in question, and this mission varies from one squad mate to another. After all, they are individuals with differing needs. So Jacob will ask us to investigate a distress call, seemingly from the missing starship his father was on, which disappeared without a trace a decade ago. Mordin will ask us to brave a trip to Tuchanka to rescue a former student whom he believes is being coerced into working on a cure for the genophage. The truth, however, is a tad less comfortable. Miranda will want us to venture to Ilium to protect her younger sister from her megalomaniacal father. Garrus wants our assistance in avenging the deaths of his former vigilante squad. It's ultimately up to us if we help him follow through with his vendetta, or teach him that retribution is a hollow quest. To avoid outlining the entire catalogue unnecessarily, what I like most about these loyalty missions is they don't adhere to a strict formula. They are entirely bespoke to the character we are aiding. Some boast bog-standard cover shooting end-to-end, but others, such as Grunts, might pertain to a fixed point, in a more arena setup I suppose, as we face the rights with him to become a Krogan adult, culminating in a showdown with a Thresher Maw. Other loyalty missions are unique still, and may not feature any shooting at all, imposing challenge instead through the presence of a fail state. Thane's mission to stop his son Colliat from going down the same hitman path as he features no action sequences as such, but if we lose track of Colliat's target, the mission will fail and Thane's loyalty will not be obtained. My favourite loyalty mission in the game, though, has to be Samara's, where we help her track down and kill the dangerous criminal she was hunting when we met her. An Ardat Yakshi, one of Mass Effect 2's more interesting and more terrifying lore implementations. Essentially, it's a very rare genetic defect among pure-blooded Asari, where their nervous system melding monogender intercourse equivalent kills their partner and has an addictive effect on the Asari, transforming them into highly dangerous serial killers. And as an added plot twist, the Ardat Yakshi in question, Morinth, is Samara's daughter. In fact, all three of her daughters have the condition. The other two accepted a life of seclusion in a monastery, but Morinth chose to flee, which is why Samara became a Justicar in the first place. The mission has us investigate the home of Morinth's last victim, where we see the impact this dangerous killer is leaving behind. On top of that, we have to be observant, and pick up on details to draw Morinth out, and then keep her interest long enough that she invites us back to her place for schmexy time, and tries to kill us. If your charm intimidate aren't high enough, you can even fall under her spell, albeit momentarily, before Samara saves the day. But what makes this mission stand out to me is that not only does this mission have a fail state, you can also kill the companion you came here with. You can replace Samara with Morinth. It's a fundamentally stupid move on Shepard's part, because why would you want a deranged Asari serial killer on your squad? But it gets crazier again. Once back on the Normandy with Samara's evil daughter, you can romance her, even though you know for a fact that will lead to your certain, instantaneous but nonetheless terrifying death.
Embrace eternity.
So as you can imagine, sticking to the script is the advisable decision. There's a notable shift in agency that ensures we still have it on the understanding that we can't shift the Asari Justicar off hers. Her code is absolute and deals in black and white. Unlike many other characters, we can't convince her to not kill. So to give the player a sense of control, we have to concentrate to ensure we pique Morinth's interest for long enough to get here, and then we can choose between Samara and her daughter. On top of that, the eerie tone of this mission is impeccable. As we investigate Morinth's previous kill, it scratches that fear of the unknown itch, while the rest of Mass Effect 2 doesn't play into that anywhere near as well as Mass Effect 1 did. Then working your way through the Afterlife VIP area, you get that building tension. Before we meet Morinth, we meet a bloke at the door who's met her, confirming this demonic killer is nearby. Samara warns us of the danger we're putting ourselves in, and that gives us a sense of thrill. We don't know when Morinth is going to show up, only that she surely will soon. And when she finally emerges from the shadows, it sends a cold chill down your spine. And all of this occurs against the dingy backdrop of Omega. So in a way, it tells you how dangerous this lawless place is. Not only that, it highlights some of the horrors that await us in the galaxy. It's as unique as Mass Effect 2 gets, and it's precisely the kind of creepy vibes I like in a Mass Effect game. This is also the culmination of Samara's arc. Killing Morinth is why she became a Justicar. We get to see what helping her see this mission through means. All things considered, it's a very complete example of what precisely Mass Effect 2 is trying to get at with its character work. The best perspective to take here is to look at Mass Effect 2 as if it were episodes of a Villain of the Week television show. And the vast majority of episodes come in 3 parts: recruiting a character, expiring their dialogue, and then carrying out their loyalty mission, culminating their story, where they face their respective foes or come to some self-realization. Except that layout has been diced up and put in a blender, along with every other episode if you will, and spread out in between the cracks of this game's overarching plot. So you're constantly bouncing between chunks of each, allowing the individual character arcs to appear deeper because they're all running concurrently. How the game applies that allows for something to overarch. It works because the main narrative is incredibly basic. The Collector threat is a heavy but simple one. It's the characters that we latch onto. Who would have thought being resurrected by terrorists to kill bug people could be this much fun? If you ask me to pinpoint what part of Mass Effect 2 is its greatest strength, I'd say the characters without hesitation. They are the backbone of this game. But ultimately they do have to interface with an overarching narrative that suffers for its lack of Reapers. To clarify, the Reapers are present, they are involved, and the Collectors are a proxy of them, as we discover in the next instance of the main story interrupting the side content where we land on a dormant Collector ship. We learn that the mysterious Collectors we've been fighting are actually the Protheans that mysteriously vanished 50,000 years ago. As it turns out, their genetics have been heavily re-engineered by the Reapers. So, they are agents of the Reapers. That is their sole purpose, that much is true. They are a part of the Reapers' plan to harvest the galaxy of its spacefaring civilizations, and as we discover moving through this ship, hitting fringe colonies in the Terminus systems appears to be but the beginnings of their plans. But if the Protheans became the Collectors and have been around for this length of time, 50,000 years, and are proving effective at carrying out the harvest, you can't help but retroactively wonder what the point of Saren was. His Black Op approach and Geth invasion of the Citadel surely would have been more effective after the Collectors had weakened Citadel space. Not to mention the political rumblings of Mass Effect 1 would make Shepard's meddling impossible in that order. Are you seriously telling me the Reapers had more useful agents this entire time? They have an army, what did they need Saren for? You could definitely make the argument that the Reapers needed to be closer for the Collectors to become active. But we learn the name Collector by Miranda pointing out that they are Collectors. This implies that they have been active prior to the events of Mass Effect 2, within this cycle well enough to be given a name. Since we can discern that is the case, why in Mass Effect 1 were the Collectors nowhere to be seen? Did the Reapers just not think their army would be useful there? The presence of Geth raises just as many alarm bells. Having that extra force would have sealed the deal and the harvest would be over by now. I thought the whole point of what made the Reapers so effective at wiping out spacefaring life since the dawn of time was that they arrived with overwhelming force. I get that Sovereign was a vanguard. There technically isn't a plot hole here, but surely Sovereign would have used all the means already present in the galaxy. That might not be other Reapers, and it certainly wouldn't include the entirety of the Reaper forces, but the Collectors are already here. At worst, it's a small logical lapse, but enough of those and you'll blow open the Reaper mystique and end up with the Star Child. A bigger problem for me with the Collectors, though, is just how uninterestingly they are delivered. I'm not saying they're not interesting. Finding out this horrible fate the Protheans suffered as a species is disturbing, but a massive part of what made Mass Effect 1 so immersive was unraveling this galactic mystery one thread at a time, figuring out Saren's plans and what exactly the Reapers are, and uncovering the truth contradicts accepted history by galactic standards. We do get hints in Mass Effect 2 that to most in the Terminus systems, the Collectors are just valuable trade partners, but when it comes to the mystery of why they're abducting human colonies, the Elusive Man proposes a hypothesis early, and that theory is correct. No twists, no turns, he simply states it's possible the Collectors are working with the Reapers, and sure enough they aren't Reapers and work with Reapers, because it's suggested right away, and the Reapers are the ultimate antagonists of the Mass Effect trilogy, something Mass Effect 1's ending made obvious. There was no way we were going to de-escalate from that theory. In other words, the Collectors are too predictable. While I could certainly dream up ways to prolong the mystique of the Collectors, and that could be as simple as not immediately drawing the working theory towards the Reapers, I think the problem with the Collectors' mystery isn't so much that the mystery itself is lacking, but that mysteries in general are. If I were to dream up a way to turn Mass Effect 1 on its head for Mass Effect 2, to formulate the mystery, I would actually look to Cerberus. You can have your big shock death and Cerberus resurrecting Shepard. I mean, why not? If we're going crazy, we might as well. But rather than have Cerberus immediately take credit for transforming Commander Shepard into Space Jesus, why not have them present themselves as an anonymous, highly compartmentalized organization? They at least have the last bit down. Why wouldn't they leverage that to manipulate Shepard into believing we aren't working for Cerberus? This way, the Elusive Man would actually be a mystery befitting of his name, amplifying the big question, what is his angle? That question is present anyway, but it would be way more potent if our starting point had less knowledge. It would also make way more sense than an organization of criminalized human extremists having branding on their uniforms, and come to think of it, the Normandy SR2. Would the Shroud of Anonymity not be more beneficial to this caliber of mission? It is at least clear that Cerberus didn't intend to tell Shepard they were Cerberus straight away, but Jacob kind of spilled the beans on moral grounds. So my solution I would propose for that would be to have Jacob not know who he's working for. Like I said, heavily compartmentalized organization. They function best in covert cells. That's kind of redundant when a highly recognizable logo is not covert. And though Cerberus, as far as we can tell in Mass Effect 1, didn't really carry any branding, if a random Quarian twigs that we're Cerberus straight away at the start of the game, I'd say the Elusive Man's PR relaunch hit its intended target audience. Anyway, to get back to the point, Mass Effect 2's overarching story feels like it lacks in the mystery area, and since you can only unravel the Reapers once, the Collector plot running concurrently with a more human-centric mystery could have been great. That would have given the player something else to focus on. The Collectors would be free to be the prominent threat they are, but the fact they exist in the shadows of more menacing villains would be a lot easier to overlook were it obscured by the Elusive Man actually being elusive. A different dimension of mystery is left on the table, and instead we get to ponder the do we really know Cerberus question. It would be very interesting if the answer wasn't obviously yes, but not only did we sift through their tomfoolery in Mass Effect 1, in the sequel their unapologetic foolery persists. Jack's arc, for instance, is dictated by Cerberus's cruelty. They abducted young biotic children, faked their deaths to their parents, and then took them to a facility on a rainy planet to experiment on them. The elusive man deliberately leaked data to lure the collectors to Horizon, sacrificing thousands of lives to prove a point we already understood. Then the dopey melon pulled off another worldly, luring us to a derelict collector ship, knowing it was a trap but never thought to tell us that, demonstrating that he cannot be trusted and will endanger our crew for the slightest convenience. His tactical brain is truly something else. He needed the collectors to believe they had the upper hand, so he gave them the upper hand. What kind of ingenious 5D chess strategies is this guy going to pull out of his backside next, forfeiting the game? Then, to top it all off, there's the Project Overlord DLC, where they torture an autistic guy into becoming an organic interface with the Geth. As good as that DLC is in isolation, that and the strongly worded email we get from the elusive man after completing the DLC is all the evidence we need to prove that moral bankruptcy would actually be a step up for these guys. In fact, the space racism is the easiest bit to defend. I get that we're not supposed to take Cerberus's claims at face value, but I can't help but feel as if Mass Effect 2 makes it way too easy not to. We meet obviously well-intended characters within the organization who aren't blatant xenophobes, and we can rationalize the elusive man and his minions have indoctrinated them into believing they're on the right side of history. What's difficult to see, however, is how. The elusive man's attempts at manipulating us are overt. Furthermore, we know the deeds of the organization he's representing, so we know straight up every single well-intentioned member of the organization we meet is misguided, and quite possibly a idiot. The best deed we see them perform is resurrecting Shepard, the ethics of which the game entirely ignores, and then it's back to the usual programming of man-made horrors. And every time we find one, the elusive man goes, "Ah, a rogue cell." Boy, you sure do have a lot of those. You can only get away with that so many times before it becomes apparent the entire organization is rogue, which is the case here. We know too much about the elusive man's intentions straight up to become remotely at risk of falling for his bull. Rather than spending any time wondering how he could possibly be on our side, I find myself wondering how any of the well-intentioned Cerberus characters could think that he is. I guess this is skewed by the fact that we're playing as Commander Shepard, who no doubt is going to be exposed to enough of Cerberus to obtain clarity way quicker, which if anything would make it important to the elusive man to ensure that Shepard doesn't find out too early that he's working with Cerberus. But we're reconciling a cartoonishly evil organization with a mysterious organization that brought us back from the literal dead immediately. The biggest casualty in this, of course, is the simplest takeaway. Mass Effect 2 wants to explore the key point that a human future under Cerberus is no better than being harvested by the Reapers. The elusive man has no problem sacrificing even human lives in the name of research, and is happy to strip away human autonomy, allowing his organization to transform innocents into purpose-built machines without their express consent, or perhaps even understanding of what's going on. This is not far off in concept to what the Reapers do, and the Collector plot actually services that in fairness. As the plot later reveals, they are harvesting humans to make a human Reaper. The mirroring in Cerberus going almost entirely unnoticed is particularly weird when you note the obvious foreshadowing that the elusive man is fated to Reaper indoctrination, his cybernetic eyes serving as a cue that that process has already begun. Much like Saren, who boasted many augmentations at the hands of his machine masters. Even if they are some variety of bog-standard augmentation, with no relation to the Reapers, the parallel is apparent and Mass Effect 3 vindicates it. So to summarise, as much as the Collectors are also guilty of this, Cerberus is a big example of the logical lapses Mass Effect 2's main story suffers from in a bid to simplify itself at the expense of its most interesting ideas. Yet at times it feels as if it's sorely missing those ideas, and the shallow Collector plot becomes far more exposed than it was intended to be. Even with the high-standard character work that makes this game so good. This creates a knock-on effect that bleeds well into Mass Effect 3, but I think I'll talk more about that problem in that video. So to move on, after this Collector ship mission, we can confirm the Reapers are in fact involved. So, to pass through the Omega-4 relay, since the mass relay is known for destroying any ship that tries, we're going to need to acquire something from the Reapers known as an IFF, an Identification Friend or Foe device. In theory, though this being storytelling I suppose it's more of a certainty, the IFF will allow us to pass through the Omega-4 relay to reach the Collector homeworld safely, or as safe as considerably faster than light jumping into a galactic core full of black holes can be. In order to do that, we'll need to find this IFF, but worry not! The elusive man has just the place. It's amazing what you can find in Starship scrapyards. I kid, this is not a central locking switch, and it's not like we're trying to find a part for a Ford Mondeo. Instead, he sends us to a derelict Reaper. But hold up, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Reaper IFF mission is the first one we can play immediately after completing the last main story mission. Up until this point, the main narrative's precedent is take your time and let the main story come to you. Now that we can go to it, until we do that, we're unleashed on this game. Finally liberated from the looming elusive man. We can go to the IFF mission straight away, but the dialogue after the conversation with the elusive man telling us about it hints toward it being a point of no return. So this is our last best time to venture off and do content, wrap up every loyalty mission, and fire probes at every planet to ensure we gather resources to upgrade the Normandy so when the Collectors attack, it doesn't get Normandied. So, what kind of content can we expect in this sprawling galaxy?
Probing Uranus.
I don't mean to overlook that the very small hub areas of Mass Effect 2 have content. On the Citadel, there's talking to a journalist and having the option to punch her in the face. We can help out a Quarian who's being accused of being a pickpocket. We can go for a boogie confirming dancing is not among Shepard's many talents. Inquire if there are any fish in the water on the Presidium on the behalf of a Krogan who just really wants to know. And of course, most importantly, we can get ourselves blackout drunk.
It's green. Oh yeah, put more of the stuff in the thing where stuff goes in.
Cerberus spent 4 billion credits bringing me back from the dead. I am getting my mileage out of this liver whether it likes it or not. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah. These are just a few examples of the content you can find in the Citadel, one of the small areas, all of which are full of stuff like this. On Omega, for instance, we can help the Krogan Patriarch, acting as his Krant to protect him from mercenaries. We can help a Quarian on his pilgrimage down on his luck, finance passage off of this rock, tempt breaking our fidelity to the Reapers, god this is weird, and of course, who could forget getting ourselves nicely sauced at the bar. But unless you're into being spiked, don't go to the downstairs one. Outside of Loyalty Mission, Mass Effect 2's content, particularly in the environments we can linger in, are primarily short environmental stories. They exist to accent the portion of the world we find ourselves in, telling us a bit about where we are, and on top of that serve the basic function at being a chance at some easy charm/intimidate points. Ordinarily they're quick and don't derail you for too long. That way you can feel the bustle a bit. This may just be a notch up from conversations you can overhear, but that too is interesting. Interacting with the advertisements on the Citadel, for instance, they're funny. Particularly, I'm quite fond of the promotional scenes for Elcor Hamlet.
And don't forget to catch Elcor Hamlet live, an unforgettable 14-hour experience.
Being a 14-hour experience.
That brings me to the best part about these areas, that being the continuation of lore beats from Mass Effect 1. In the many lifts of Mass Effect 1, you may very well have heard a news report about Francis Kitt producing Hamlet with an all-Elcor cast, the joke being that Elcor communicate incredibly subtly. As such, they are known for declaring their emotions before communicating with somebody not Elcor, proceeding to speak in a monotone. A total throwaway joke in the environment for somebody who's been paying attention to overhear and be amused by. 2 years have passed in the galaxy and now Elcor Hamlet is a thing, and through these advertising boards we can witness various snippets of quite possibly the most painful rendition of the Shakespearean tragedy. You know, this November coming, instead of teasing a game that's still years away, BioWare should just post the full unabridged 14-hour version of this. It would make for a much more memorable and time-consuming N7 day. That being said, I'd be surprised if they did the whole 14 hours, but it's never too late to find somebody with a monotonous voice to make it. This is just one of many lore beats, however obscure, that give the backdrop vibes. There are various stations where you can listen to news reports. Some are entirely new stories, others further stories we heard snippets of in lifts in Mass Effect 1, but this also serves as a source of validation for many of the choices you'd think would get lost in importing your save to Mass Effect 2. If you spare the Rachni Queen on Noveria, there will be Rachni sightings. If you save Terra Nova from the Batarians in the Bring Down the Sky DLC, there'll be a story about that. If you don't, there will be a story about the disaster. If we manage to save the colony of Zoo's Hope on Ferros, there will now be plans for its expansion. There'll be a memorial dedicated to whichever squad mate died on Vermeer. If we endorse Captain Anderson as the first human counselor, there'll even be a story about that. This is a great and simple way to demonstrate the precedent that no matter how big or small your choices in Mass Effect 1 were, they've had an impact. But on its own, it wouldn't be enough. There are other ways where your choices from Mass Effect 1 carry over in small ways. You might meet a character you chose to help. Ilium seems to be quite a popular spot for this. We can meet an Asari under the influence of the Rachni Queen, relaying thanks, the Noveria Internal Affairs Officer we could choose to help, Gianna Parasini, and the Asari Shiala we liberated from the Thorian on Ferros, who is now green? These characters may or may not come with renewed need for our help, so in a way, even if we don't see it, we're still influencing the stories we've left behind. We even get to catch up with Conrad, Commander Shepard's biggest, most obsessive fan. As you can see, now he's taken the bit a smidgen too far, and it's meant to be dependent on our choices when dealing with Conrad in Mass Effect 1, but it's bugged out, so no matter what you did, you're always dealing with the renegade choice. It is kind of funny, Conrad is the kind of man to imagine you jammed the gun in his face regardless of whether or not you did. Either way, he's our problem now, and we get a choice in how we deal with this idiot. Ilium, of course, has yet one more Mass Effect 1 surprise in store for us. Liara Tassoni is here. That's not exactly a surprise. She's an information broker now, so she feeds us information with regards to recruiting Samara and Thane. Nevertheless, if we romanced her in the first game, we can rekindle that flame. That being said, it's been a rough 2 years for Liara. By that I mean, in Mass Effect 2, her personality is entirely different. No longer is she a xenoarchaeologist specializing in the Protheans, she deals in information, and it would seem her social skills have come a long way. The DLC centered around her does an alright job at bridging the gap, but the pipeline from naive introvert to ruthless information broker is rather abrupt. Whether or not that's a strength or a weakness depends on how you view it. Either way, there's a fine line between character growth and total metamorphosis here. Neither's a bad thing, but we have to take into consideration that occurs off-screen, and we have to digest that transformation in passing conversation. She doesn't play a heavy role in Mass Effect 2's overarching plot, nor does she become entangled in the game's essential character web, but the layer of the Shadow Broker expansion does flesh her out here. As it turns out, the Liara we meet in Mass Effect 2 is a mixture of actual character development and a ruse built for survival purposes. Liara is locked in a dangerous game of cat and mouse with the Shadow Broker. She's so different with us in her office because she's quite certain she's being spied on, a theory she proves correct. That bit's hard to pick up on because that's base game content that you can entirely skip to do the DLC, after which point it becomes unavailable. Long story short, Liara got caught up in beef with the Shadow Broker while attempting to retrieve Commander Shepard's body, and that journey has cost her people, which no doubt has hardened her. Simultaneously, her life is in danger. The Shadow Broker wants her dead. Considering the Shadow Broker's resourcefulness as the premier information broker in the galaxy, that has forced Liara to be very careful what she says and what she does. So the entire extent of Liara's character journey is confined to this very poorly integrated, nonetheless good expansion. What I mean by that is, it too easily overwrites the base game Liara stuff. All she does is send you to hack a series of terminals, that much is true. but the dialogue exchanges highlight there's way more going on with Liara than meets the eye. We can bypass all of that by randomly entering a conversation with her and going, hey, let's get the Shadow Broker, without laying the foundation that something's going on between Liara and the Shadow Broker, initiating the DLC with omniscience. So connective tissue between base game Liara and expansion Liara is somewhat lackluster, even if the DLC itself is pretty cool, culminating in storming the Shadow Broker's base on a stormy world, discovering Liara's lost friend is still alive, and revealing this entire time the mysterious Shadow Broker, who has loomed in the shadows of the galaxy for decades, is one of these. Don't get me wrong, cool design, and I'm always happy to see the repertoire of aliens in the Mass Effect universe expanded, but the Shadow Broker's a bit of a mystery even in Mass Effect 1, so forgive me for saying this, but who the fuck? The unsatisfactory culmination of the Shadow Broker mystery being a boss fight with an octothalmous space gorilla aside, the DLC concludes with Liara taking up the mantle and becoming the next Shadow Broker, which of course is going to be chiefly useful going into Mass Effect 3. In this game, however, all it means is we can come here, monitor Grunt's browsing history, and spy on people with sometimes oddly cinematic CCTV cameras. Worth it for the Keeper 20 lore, I suppose. Anyway, this DLC solidified Liara's character development into a ruthless Dark Lord of spies. Ruse or not, this is who she is now. I think it ultimately works, and we are there for the landing, so it's not like the development entirely occurred off-screen. But there's definitely whiplash, and I have a hard time telling if that was intentional. Either way, Liara needed to come into her own, and she does here. That within itself is rewarding to see. Anyway, the location in Mass Effect 2 most altered by our choices in the predecessor is Tuchanka, the Krogan homeworld. If you kill Rex on Vermeer, Tuchanka is a dump. If you keep Rex alive in Mass Effect 1, Tuchanka is also a dump. But at least Rex is here. He's on a mission to save his species, developing from the cynical, battle-hardened Krogan we see in Mass Effect 1 to something even if only slightly more optimistic. A development we see beginning in that game if we explore his dialogue enough. If Rex is dead in Mass Effect 2, then we meet his brother Reeve, who is a rather stereotypical Krogan. Violent, arrogant, and stupid. Sure, Tuchanka might be a wasteland, and the future of the Krogan looks dire either way, but in keeping Rex alive, Clan Urdnot at least has level-headed leadership, meaning there's hope for these angry tortoises. But don't let Tuchanka's constant, desolate exterior fool you. The dynamics of the very modest parcel of the world we can explore are entirely changed by whether or not Rex is present. He wants to unite a divided people with a cultural reform. We join him as he only just begins to break away from the vicious cycle, but were it Reeve here, the vicious cycle would be continuing. Much of the dialogue with the other Krogan on the planet is different to account for this. In other words, this place is far warmer for Rex's presence. Even if it's still cold, bleak, and borderline inhospitable, it's entirely transformed for having a friend here. I get a feeling it would be a tough sell to book any holidays here, though. There's only so much Rex can do with a long-lived Krogan to raise the species out of despair in 2 very short years. There's a lot of damage to undo and grudges to let go of. Nevertheless, there's a distinct impression progress has begun, even if the other clans thrash against it. We can revel in the fact that it was our mission to stop Saren that re-motivated this tired old Krogan to not give up on his people. So Tuchanka might be the dullest, most miserable, monochromatic environment in the entire game, and it is those things, albeit by design. Underneath that layer, though, we have perhaps the most colourful demonstration of cause and effect between our choices in one Mass Effect game and the outcomes in the next. Beyond that, it's fun to come here and blow up Pyjax, I suppose. Mordin's loyalty mission in particular greatly expands on the desperate situation of the Krogan. It's made especially interesting by the fact that he's directly contributed towards this misery. He modified the genophage that virtually sterilized the Krogan to ensure that it kept working. And while he defends doing that to us, the mission, particularly against the virtually destroyed backdrop of Tuchanka, does a great job at highlighting how one moment in galactic history scarred an entire species forever. I get the feeling I could talk at extensive length about how Tuchanka's perhaps one of Mass Effect 2's most interesting locations, but I get the feeling you've already gathered that, so for the sake of timekeeping, let's shift back to talking content stuff. Navigation between one world and the next is pretty much how it was in Mass Effect 1. Via the CIC you use mass relays to jump between clusters, and then a fuel-based FTL drive to jump between systems in those clusters. From there we can inspect and learn little bits about planets, and that's really cool, something that carries over from Mass Effect 1. But what doesn't carry over is being able to land on planets and just rove around and soak in the vast emptiness of the galaxy. As far as I can see, there were two primary reasons for this change. The first being Mass Effect 2's gameplay is entirely overhauled and is no longer built to facilitate particularly open environments. Nothing makes this clearer than the Firewalker expansion or the M44 Hammerhead segment of the Project Overlord DLC, where this floating abomination is inferior to the Mako in every possible way. The other reason was I don't think the purpose of these barren world areas was something the vast majority of players would be equipped to understand until well after the review period. By which point, of course, the game has been criticised for things that actually make it unique, and then a sequel's worked up without those elements, and it can take a while after the sequel's even out before people twig onto the fact that those features that made the previous game such an enjoyable experience are not all there. So to transport ourselves into the minds of a 2007 games critic, yes, there's a very easy argument to be made that these barren planets are, you know what, barren. And if you're targeting a tight, content-dense experience, then yes, this is absolutely obstructive to that. So Mass Effect 2 understandably targets its dense content over things that will risk it receiving the same criticism the second time around. And as much as Mass Effect 2 very obviously did not need this to survive and even thrive, the artistic intent behind this in particular is missing. Instead of traversing alien worlds, we get to explore them from orbit by firing probes at them, which for the most part doesn't tell us anything about the world aside from what resources we might find on it to upgrade the Normandy so it can survive one cutscene event. It's a very direct system, but it's also bland. We learn nothing and simply watch a number go up. Every so often when we inspect a world, we'll be told by EDI that an anomaly has been detected on the surface, encouraging us to probe that anomaly, which then results in a short mission on the planet. These missions typically consist of one-note tasks within incredibly limited environments. You know what, there is a fair few of these, and they are varied in their own ways, but what they aren't is particularly expansive. They are just things to do. We get that impression we've been in a distinct environment, but there's no lingering on how being on an alien world makes us feel. For me, there's just way too much certainty about it. If a planet has an anomaly, EDI will tell us immediately before we even start launching probes at the thing, so if there isn't, you don't need to fire any probes at it to know that. Not that that matters, you'll be firing a load of probes at it anyway. We have to suck it dry of resources so we can upgrade the Normandy's toilets. The player cannot organically find content. It's either advertised to us or it isn't there. Which cuts out that however slight sense of exploration that Mass Effect 1 had. It may very well have meant you'd spend a lot of time not doing very much, but at least there's a feeling, an emotion the game wants you to sit with while you go between one objective and the next, whereas Mass Effect 2 is chronically afraid of wasting the player's time. It's not a design philosophy that's overall too harmful, but when it comes to unleashing us on a vast galaxy, it's not a mentality that can coexist with any kind of feeling. Also, if we're going to spend this much time launching probes at planets, I'd argue this runs just as much risk of wasting the player's time as exploration in the Mako did. It may be oddly cathartic, but that's how I viewed exploring in the Mako too. This is just less personal. Except this was a good 80% optional. Orbitally bombarding planets with probes in Mass Effect 2 to secure the best outcome is arguably essential. So let me know which you prefer, whipping around the cosmos in your cantankerous space car, or harvesting materials while staring at a rotating texture. Before we go on to talk about how Mass Effect 2's gameplay differs from Mass Effect 1's, at long last, I know, there is one more facet of content I'm yet to entirely encompass, and that, my dear friends, is the DLCs. I sort of jumped the gun and addressed the layer of the Shadow Broker as an offshoot of discussing Liara, and I've alluded to Project Overlord and Arrival, and Firewalker, come to think of it, and in fact, Zaid and Kasumi. Outside of recruitment, all the loyalty missions, the main story missions, the DLCs are where the content is most substantial after the fact. Some of it feels like DLC, some of it doesn't, I can't tell which is preferable. It's important to acknowledge that Mass Effect 2 released at a time where EA was getting a bit crazy with their downloadable content. This included Day 1 DLCs, or as I prefer to call it, repackaged cut content. Take for instance the companion Zaid. It's not a bad loyalty mission, but it's all there is to explore any depth this character might have. Outside of this mission, all he does is make one-liners, and otherwise it's kind of like he isn't even there. It's cool that doing the right thing might risk not attaining Zaid's loyalty, but this guy just doesn't boast anywhere near the same depth as any of the other squad mates. In other words, he's an extra gun. The other Day 1 DLC that wasn't just a random piece of gear took us to the Normandy crash site. Shepard makes the poignant trip alone to this cold, icy world to sift through the remnants of his previous ship and find the dog tags of the crewmates who died when the Collectors attacked. It is a bit of a collectathon, briefly interrupted by erecting a statue and wondering how on earth Commander Shepard fit that in his pocket, but it's also that little something more. As we move about, there are various locations where we experience flashbacks. That way we can associate the part of the wreckage we're looking at to the part of the ship from the previous game, and that helps it feel familiar despite its mangled state. It also nicely breaks up the collection of 20 dog tags, which is objectively quite dull. We are doing that with purpose, presumably to return them to the Fallen's families, but we're also swiveling back to the SSV Normandy's unceremonious send-off and giving it that ceremony. Think of it as something of a funeral for a friend, and not just necessarily for the ship. It's also worth noting Navigator Presley was among those who died. In Mass Effect 1, he was a bit of a space racist. He neither liked nor trusted aliens, and made his concerns known to us. Amongst the debris we can find a datapad that detailed his mentality shift. He went from being highly suspicious of Tali, Garrus, Rex, and Liara, to trusting them with his life. Even after death there's character development, I suppose. So yes, this is a poignant short mission. There's no action and next to no dialogue. It is a moment of silent reflection. A silent acknowledgement of the first game, and one of the only parts of Mass Effect 2 that acknowledges the cold loneliness of space. Something definitely worthwhile soaking in early on in a playthrough, and a caliber of experience Mass Effect 2 could have done with more of. Beyond the Day 1 DLCs, we have Kasumi's loyalty mission, which, despite being a bit over the top, is a really good loyalty mission, only hampered by the fact that it has to do all the heavy lifting with Kasumi's character. Outside of this heist, we go on together. Like Zaid, Kasumi cannot be engaged in a dialogue tree and only has one-liners, the bulk of which she dedicates to not talking about herself. So while the missions are good and pretty encompassing, neither character has the depth of the base squad. Then there's Project Overlord, which doesn't do the elusive man any favours overall, but I actually think it's within itself a great piece of content. We're sent to a Cerberus facility studying a downed Geth ship, where a VI has supposedly gone rogue and assumed control over the Geth, meaning we've got to battle our way through Geth while figuring out how that's possible. Dr. Archer appears to be keeping something from us, leading to a disturbing revelation worthy of the unsettling ambience. In a way, it reminds me of the Lunar Rogue VI mission from Mass Effect 1, where we're sent to the moon to shut it down, with unsettling hints that the virtual intelligence had become self-aware. As we work our way through the Project Overlord facility, the Rogue VI appears to be begging us to make it stop. Of course, the reason for that is it's brutally entangled with Dr. Archer's brother David, in a disturbing display of the capacity for human cruelty. It might lean hard into Rain Man as a basis for the tropes to lean into when portraying autism, but this expansion's purpose is to make you incredibly uncomfortable. Above all else, it shows the moral bankruptcy of Cerberus. It does so, in alarming fashion, but it's perhaps a bit too absolute in its condemnation of the organization and by extension the elusive man for us to then persist to work with him. As for other DLCs, I've already gone over the layer of the Shadow Broker. It's an interesting continuation for Liara's character, considering she's not a part of our squad in this game, and I really like how it expands Ilium across its own storyline and makes it feel massive. The taxi chase segment might be the most momentum-lacking chase sequence ever, but across it we see so much of this hyper-futuristic urban cityscape. Despite being modestly sized games by any modern standpoint, when Mass Effect wants to convey scale, it does so amazingly. Then there's the Firewalker pack. The less said about it, the better. Then there's Arrival, which so very obviously is meant to be completed after you've finished the main story. But if you thought otherwise, you'd be forgiven. Mass Effect 2 is very inconsistent with how it conveys urgency. Nevertheless, Arrival is best treated as something of an epilogue, and in this video we shall treat it as such, and move on for now. As I've gone over, Mass Effect 2's content prioritizes being as content dense as possible. If something isn't substantial, it doesn't take very long. If something is, it might take longer, but its main purpose is to ensure there's always something in front of you to do. From the perspective of trying to drive the story forward, this works to its benefit, but as far as the complete picture of the galaxy is concerned, there's one detriment. There's no opportunity to find something because you chose to explore. You can choose to scan planets for resources and accidentally happen upon a bit of content, but that doesn't hit the same as stumbling upon an ancient structure organically. There's no room to question what it is we've uncovered. If we find something on our travels, we can immediately dive into the confrontation element, and that cuts out any chance of mystery. Mass Effect 1 is full of dark and eerie discoveries, yet in this game we're meant to be exposed to the seedier side of the galaxy, and that's explored reasonably well if not brilliantly. But the sense of cosmic mystery that made Mass Effect 1 incredible, observed both in its narrative and its world delivery, is missing here in favour of guarantees, and that applies both to gameplay and story. So let's now turn our minds to how Mass Effect 2's gameplay differed. It's truly no shock that the difference between how Mass Effect 1 and 2 play is night and day. The remaster did a good job of covering up Mass Effect 1's gameplay shortcomings and even fashioning it into an enjoyable system, but there are still remnants of the crude 2007 charm. As lovable as it is, the Mako still handles a bit like a sponge. In combat, enemy AI can lead to some random occurrences, and who could forget the inventory management system from hell. There were plenty of improvements that needed making for Mass Effect 2, and boy does it make them. The combat of Mass Effect 2 is genuinely fun to play. It's a cover shooter that relies on tight level design as much as satisfying impact. Basically, you shoot people till their health bar is gone. But unlike with Mass Effect 1, keeping up with the game's difficulty isn't a game of micromanaging your inventory. Instead, it's a game of choosing your loadout in accordance to what weapons you enjoy using the most, upgrading them for damage boosts, selecting the aesthetic of your armor based on fringe benefits rather than anything substantial, and then fighting your way through the levels mindfully. In Mass Effect 1, with the right equipment, you could brute force your way through most combat scenarios. In this game, there's no point where you can take anywhere near as much damage. You will have to take cover. Then, to make the most out of it, you'll also have to command your squad and use their powers, in tandem with your own of course. The higher the difficulty, the more you'll have to do this, but even on lower difficulties the game doesn't want you to neglect those systems. The biggest difference in combat in Mass Effect 2, however, is ammunition. It exists. In Mass Effect 1, ammo wasn't a thing, peculiar for a shooter. In its stead, we had a heatsink. We could fire the gun until it overheats, at which point it would activate a cooldown period. Combat became less about reloading, but finding the steady rate of fire that enabled you to constantly shoot, and that only got easier as the game went on. Mass Effect 2 uninvents that revolutionary warfare technology straight away. In-universe, guns still fire on heat, not ammo, but now we have thermal clips. And it's in swapping them that we emulate reloading, giving us a system functionally identical to ammunition. I can see why they made the change. I think having ammunition to monitor and keep track of is always going to be more engaging than being able to fire endless bullets, and being able to run out means you're going to use your full arsenal and not just resort to one weapon. The overheat becomes so trivial towards the back end of a playthrough of Mass Effect 1 that simply swapping guns within itself became redundant. In Mass Effect 2, simply because you can run out of ammo, you don't wind up facing that same problem. If anything, the need to swap your weapons escalates as the battles naturally get more intense. I also find there's a greater distinction between what each weapon type accomplishes. If you're facing heavy mechs, you're going to want something that deals devastating damage quickly. Similarly, a rocket launcher is wasted on cannon fodder. So of the weapon choices we have, which is highly dependent on the class we choose, they all have their place. Selection also isn't about picking up a slightly better version of something we already have. The looting system that was so frustrating in Mass Effect 1 is gone. Instead, improvements are done through upgrades that make weapons do more damage, allow armor to take more damage, enhancing abilities and the like, and that ultimately means you're not going to spend anywhere near as much time managing your loadout, in keeping with the game's philosophy of keeping the player engaged. It wants you to spend less time doing the menu stuff and more time doing the action stuff. So the menu stuff, while present, is far more streamlined, and there's no upgrade that grossly imbalances the game. There's also way less emphasis on choosing your squad wisely. In Mass Effect 1, you'd often happen upon crates that you couldn't unlock because you didn't have a tech squad mate with you, or indeed probes you couldn't salvage and the like. Mass Effect 2 has double the squad mate variety. It would be annoying if we had to drag Garrus and Tali everywhere. Don't get me wrong, I do my fair share of dragging Garrus around, but the point is I choose to do that, and it's nice of Mass Effect 2 to not impose limitations on me for my squad choices. Mass Effect 1's squad pool is just modest enough that you can get away with it. 2's, however, isn't, and many areas can only be visited once. So that same setup would risk penalising the player for not knowing what to expect somewhere where they shouldn't know what to expect. Instead, there are missable things like safes full of money, and to unlock them we need to engage with a hacking minigame. In Mass Effect 1, the hacking minigame consisted of circular Frogger primarily, and yes, I am hacking a rock in this footage. In Mass Effect 2, there are two primary hacking games. You have Connect the Dots, and Match the Lines of Code, both of which are incredibly simple, but for the most part if you fail, you cannot try again. Unless of course the hack is a mandatory part of the level. The game also will not pause for you to do them. So for the best outcome you need to make sure an area is secure before you go hacking anything, because if you're interrupted by being attacked, the hacking minigame will register that as a fail. But you get the idea, a little bit more brains goes into this than Mass Effect 1, where often the hacking minigame quite literally allows you to spam up until it works. Unless of course you played the original version with a controller, in which case you got a Simon Says minigame instead, which still occasionally crops up in the remaster, but we move on. Mass Effect 2 also has a different approach to customization. In Mass Effect 1 you mismatched the armors you found until you find one that both gives you some form of gameplay benefit and doesn't look utterly ridiculous, and you had to do this for your entire squad. In Mass Effect 2 we can customize our armor components individually, and then we can choose the color that we actually want it to be. And if you're so inclined, you can also give it a snazzy pattern from a small selection. This allows us to have a small input in how Commander Shepard appears, and because it's built on far slighter adjustments, it allows alterations to look a bit more consistent, and of course, being able to stick to a colour scheme helps there. In Mass Effect 1, certain armours looked like they would be quite handy statistically, but then they'd be white and hot pink, which is a very strange colour scheme for a soldier, so you'd choose quite possibly anything else. Simply put, that's one problem solved in very simple fashion. There are some set armors you can buy and equip, and of course you can purchase different armor bits to expand the customization, but even then it's not hugely expansive, it's just functional. The customization also dwindles for squad mates. A few characters got DLC armor in the initial release, so in the remaster they're there as standard, which is pretty cool, but for the most part you cannot influence what your squad mates look like, they just have what they wear, or what they don't in some instances. The only real time we do have a variation is after we've acquired a particular squad mate's loyalty, and these variations range from being rather cool to be honest, to entirely unnoteworthy. So yes, there is squad customization, but in the time it's taken me to say that, you could have already explored it to its limits. And that's fine. Nobody's favourite part of Mass Effect 1 was managing gear and armour. You did it to equip yourself to then go out and explore this galaxy that was both warm and cold, full of wonder and cosmic dread. But in a way, as awkward as the inventory management system in this game was, I've come to view it as part of the ritual. That doesn't mean I necessarily mourn its absence. To move on, another huge gameplay difference occurs in conversation. I've already covered that dialogue is way more cinematic in this game versus Mass Effect 1, but what I didn't mention is how the morality system has undergone its own transformation. The dialogue formatting is still the same, up and right for Paragon, down and right for Renegade, center right for neutral, and anything left is asking questions unless it's specified by being either red or blue. A common criticism I see is the Mass Effect games don't specify all too well what it is exactly Commander Shepard is going to say. And that is true to a point. I'm not going to pretend it isn't an offender in that department among a sea of many, but the dialogue wheel of these games does have a uniformity to it that allow you to understand the spirit of the conversation, which, considering the importance of the morality system, is more important to keep track of than what exactly Shepard does say. You see, the Paragon Renegade or Charm Intimidate system is most important in Mass Effect 2. This game rewards you the most for being consistent, and failure to do that to a great enough extent can be punishing. This was rebalanced in the remaster. The original version of this game was way more punishing with how it calculated whether or not you meet the skill checks when they crop up. While since the remaster it's become as simple as filling the meter, it used to be a percentage calculation of how many Paragon/Renegade points you've picked up out of all available up until that moment, meaning this meter didn't actually track very much. As such, there were choke points where Mass Effect 2's morality system became unimaginably punishing, and you'd have to plan out your entire playthrough around one moment. Basically, playing the original version of Mass Effect 2 blind was a nightmare. Things would almost certainly go badly because the best outcomes required you to know ahead of time what was going to happen, and more frustratingly when. And that wasn't just about timing recruitment or staving off getting the Reaper IFF until the last possible moment because it sets off a soft timer until the end of the game, but also ensuring the Normandy is fully upgraded and your entire squad barring nobody is loyal. Naturally, you'd assume that's as straightforward as doing all of their loyalty missions, right? Well, mostly. There are two pairs of squad mates whom, upon completing both of their loyalty missions, will fight. The choke point of frustration, of course, being Jack and Miranda. After having completed both their loyalty missions, we'll find them both having a mild disagreement, including biotic violence, in Miranda's office. Either our Paragon or Renegade needs to be high enough to clear this, or our only option will be to take a side and lose the loyalty of whomever we side against. The Paragon here is markedly harder than Renegade, whereas in the other spat it's the other way around. As such, in original Mass Effect 2, people would save this confrontation until fairly late into the game for their Paragon stat to be as high as possible, only to reach this confrontation and still not be able to pass the skill check. So come the back end of your playthrough, when you see the compounded effects of your mistakes, you replay the game and strictly, painstakingly engineer your playthrough so that you don't cock it up. This would manifest uninterestingly in sticking to either Paragon or Renegade choices and avoiding the one you're not going for like the plague. Since the remaster, all we're doing is tracking a meter. Once it's full, it's full. So you can toy around with elements of Renegade in a Paragon run and vice versa, as there are instances where either a Paragon or Renegade choice exists in a vacuum and not at the expense of its alternative. One such example is this game's introduction of the interrupt mechanic. These are always defaulted to either Paragon or Renegade and are indicated by the colour and emblem that crop up. The Paragon interrupts are typically quite pedestrian, but the Renegade stuff is way more varied.
You're working too hard.
In either balancing of the morality system, be it the original or legendary edition, these interrupts are such a great way to keep the player engaged with the dialogue. In the original version, it definitely also functioned as something of a test of your impulses. The game wanted you to commit to either one or the other, and then it wanted to test your commitment, rewarding your choices accordingly. The remaster's rebalancing still does, in a way, it just adds an extra layer of danger. Leeway. Get carried away with mixing Paragon and Renegade and you end up with the same problems. You still need to commit, but occasionally there's room for leeway, which makes dialogue feel less like a routine that ensures your commitment to the good or the bad choices, and more about exploring the principles that go into the decision making. So all things considered, I don't think it's a bad adjustment. I also think it lends itself to a higher success rate for first-time players. While original Mass Effect 2 incentivized an external understanding of the effect of your choices, among other things such as how the narrative beats are strung together, and while this doesn't cure all of those problems, it most certainly helps. It's less punishing for playing the game the way you should, blind. Yes, it's a game with replay value and that loses meaning immediately, but this tweak to how stringent Mass Effect 2's morality system is allows for that to a greater extent. Even if I wholeheartedly still believe Mass Effect 2's reliance on having outside-of-game knowledge is still pretty bad. It can also be way too easy to forget that when you're on your nth playthrough. The fact, however, is the back end of a playthrough is dictated heavily by what you have and haven't done, when you've done it, and in certain instances what outcome you ended up with, and that is how it should be. However, Mass Effect 2 takes it a step further, and I can't tell if it's a symptom of genius or brain death. I think there's most definitely a bit of both going on. So we go visit a dead Reaper to pick up a Reaper IFF to uncover the fate of an entire Cerberus research facility on board. They all got indoctrinated, which is absurd and just another nail in the coffin of Cerberus being idiotic. But since we've already established that Cerberus is an organization full of clowns, let's move past it. Getting the IFF is a fairly straightforward mission, with its added bit of flair coming from the fact that we make a new friend, a Geth, who, rather bafflingly considering all Geth encounters up until this point have been somewhat hostile, helps us. Long story short, we fight our way through Cerberus's latest bad idea and take the Geth and the Reaper IFF back to the Normandy. The Geth, whom we come to know as Legion, becomes our final recruit. Legion is a valuable insight into how the Geth function. Up until this point, we haven't had the slightest reason to contemplate them with any form of nuance, and yet now we've got a Geth platform friend who tells us the Geth aren't actually entirely aligned with the Reapers, only a sect of Geth known as heretics are. It's definitely an interesting parcel of the game to learn that a synthetic race governed by consensus and logic would use such a religious and emotionally charged word as a label. That makes Legion a very interesting insight into the lore of the Geth. It's a shame we can't spend very much time with it, because now that we're installing the Reaper IFF, we only really have the time to carry out Legion's loyalty mission, to either destroy the Geth heretics or overwrite them, and have them turn their backs on the Reapers and rejoin the Geth consensus, after which point we'll have the other potentially loyalty-losing spat. Then the next time we approach the CIC, the Normandy will be out of commission while the Reaper IFF installs, so Commander Shepard and all of the squad mates go on a shuttle to the next mission. What's funny about this is, since I know how Mass Effect 2 plays, there was no next mission. I'd done everything by this point. Shepard and the crew just load up onto a space car for the love of the game and disappear. But of course, our perspective remains with the Normandy. Because guess what? There's a virus in the Reaper IFF. Who'd have thought? Allowing the Collectors to pounce upon the defenseless starship, which of course means the entire crew is about to get collected. It's an on-rail segment that requires absolutely no stealth. We just have to follow red lights on the floor that lead from the Normandy's bridge all the way to the AI core, on the off chance the Collectors attack the ship, I suppose. From here, Joker unshackles EDI, and EDI more or less kills all the Collectors aboard. Unfortunately, everybody barring Joker has been collected, so now we have a motivator to expedite our expedition through the Omega-4 relay. We have got to rescue our crew, meaning the time has come to launch the final mission. I'm going to rip chronology apart to simply say that to delay will result in your entire crew's deaths. The game doesn't necessarily communicate that, but logically, to leave them at the mercy of the Collectors for any length of time more than necessary, it isn't wise, and it's good there are consequences for that, but it is just one of many decisions you can make that result in you playing the game wrong. If you want to take the opportunity to hit the strip club, it is of course your prerogative, but at this point the game wants you to have everything in place. Now is the time to hit the collector base, and any delay could prove catastrophic. So by this point the Normandy needs to be fully upgraded and your crew need to be loyal. This is the point of no return, and there's every chance you've already messed it up. For you see, everyone involved in the mission, the iconic name of which I can't say because the YouTube algorithm gods will find me in a back alley and kick the shit, might not make the return trip. How it goes isn't entirely dependent on the preparation work we've put in. That is an essential part, but in order to successfully defeat the Collectors and whack the Reapers on the nose, we're going to need to make a series of inspired tactical decisions once through the Omega-4 relay. The first few minutes of this blood-pumping finale are dedicated to a big cutscene where we see the upgrades we've put into the Normandy in action, and if we haven't done that, squad mates can die before we even get a chance to influence anything. So you're immediately either rewarded or punished depending on whether or not you paid attention, and any losses now are going to compound. Once this floating orb that infiltrates the engineering bay you can't access outside of fighting this floating orb is dealt with, and we've successfully landed somewhat on the collector base, the mission can truly begin. Fortunately, the hardest part of the actual mission with regards to the story is concerned is now behind us. We're here. But now we'll need to make a combination of decisions that won't get our squad killed. This plays into the character work of Mass Effect 2 and requires some understanding of the characters that are with us, because God knows they'll propose some dumb alternatives. This is broken down into phases so we don't have to think it up all at once, and for now we have two decisions to make. Who's going to lead a secondary fire team, and who's going into the vents to unlock doors. Jacob will basically volunteer for the vents job, which is stupid. He will die if you let him. So what you need is a tech character like Tali or Legion, with either Garrus or Miranda leading the second strike team. We can't really alter the game plan, as it were. We can only decide who does what, which I feel is a bit of a missed opportunity. But as far as this mission is concerned and its implications on Mass Effect 3, it's incredibly ambitious anyway. If we send the wrong person to do the wrong thing, or in fact that individual isn't loyal, they will most certainly die. And you can balls this mission up so badly that even Shepard dies. So there is an enormous sense of pressure to keep this squad alive. But the only way you'd know that is if you've already done the mission once before. If we exclude googling it or being told about it, I would argue the actual gameplay segments of this mission for the most part are no more intense than the collector ship we find ourselves on halfway through the story. However, for now we do have to follow the vent along and open valves as we go. Failure to do so in time won't actually result in the specialist's death, rather the mission will fail and we'll have to do it again. The important thing is you chose a specialist who can actually do the job. With a bit of method, success is guaranteed, but the intensity of this segment comes from having to push aggressively. After that we of course find their abducted crewmates. If we didn't delay at all, they'll all survive, but not before we discover they were being melted down for some reason. Then of course we'll have to send a squad mate back to escort them back to the Normandy. You'd naturally think sending someone punchy, like Grunt or Zaid, might be the play here, but no, you need those guys. Whoever you send back will be guaranteed to survive along with the crew, so it's important to acknowledge that for a decision that comes later, your best bet is to send someone that, according to a hidden stat you never see, is the weakest. So this is the best time to ensure a loyal Mordin's survival and send him back to the Normandy. Then you need a biotic specialist to protect you from the Seeker Swarms, either Samara or Jack, and there's no reason to demote Garrus from his current role. Then you're free to fight onward. Provided you stay inside the bubble, of course. Mordin's anti-Seeker technology appears to have uninvented itself, though the explanation given is there's too many for it to work, which is fair enough. Unlike the previous combat segment where we had to be as fast as possible, now the speed is entirely dictated by the game. And once that's done and dusted, we're at the core and the only decision left to make is who's joining us for the final fight. You'll want to take 2 loyal squad mates with you, but the most important thing is the power of the squad mates left behind. It also helps if they're loyal. You want plenty of strength, so provided you have Garrus, Grunt and Zaid, you're golden. So that means provided you don't take those characters with you, you're good. Now it has to be said, the action portions of this mission really don't feel any more risky than any other mission. If up until this point you've kept every squad mate alive, there isn't even a moment where it feels necessarily close. If you've played this mission a few times over a few playthroughs and got a few squad mates killed over a few years, you can see the indicators where a squad mate might have died but didn't, but this mission relies on you having that external knowledge to know when those moments occur. As such, as we teeter gradually towards the finale's finale, this ambitious mission needs something dramatic and ideally grotesque, as much to convey this isn't any other mission as it needs to renew and rejuvenate the sense of necessity. Well, introducing the Human Reaper. Turns out the Collectors have been abducting human colonists and transforming them into goop to form a new Reaper, except this one looks a bit human. But before we go dismissing this as absurd, as much as it kind of is, it isn't poorly integrated into lore. As it turns out, Reaper cores resemble the race harvested to create them. So eventually this thing would end up in the metal shell of a space crayfish. Its purpose then is to expand Reaper lore in a horrifying way. This is the heart of the evolution the Reapers have planned for us, and it's disgusting. Already thousands of people have been melted down and turned into this abomination, and the reasons why humans were singled out rather than Turians or Batarians or Asari or Solarians is because of Commander Shepard's actions destroying Sovereign, defeating Saren in Mass Effect 1. This horror is the Reaper's idea of a compliment, and that's the most disturbing thing. Fortunately, the Human Reaper is incomplete, and would require the harvesting of millions more lives to be so. So now we get the opportunity to, while fighting our way through Collectors, destroy yet another Reaper, except this time we'll be doing so before it ever gets the opportunity to live up to its name. Once that's seemingly done, we have another choice on our hands. Arguably the most significant choice in the game. Do we destroy the Collector base or do we hand it to the Elusive Man? To Cerberus. This decision should absolutely have been 10 times harder to make than it was. This is the culmination of the debate, should we or should we not trust the Elusive Man? The non-existent mystery of who is he, and what is his plan? Can he be trusted with all this advanced Reaper technology? The game makes it way too obvious that the answer is very clearly no. And this is why the on-the-nose approach to Cerberus and the Elusive Man, in my opinion, was a massive mistake. Even in the isolation of Mass Effect 2 alone, there's no world in which I could be convinced handing the Collector base to the Elusive Man would produce anything worthwhile or even good. His manipulation is obvious. We know he's the leader of a human-first terrorist organization who often run brutal experiments at the expense of humanity, and they're also kind of idiotic on the verge of comedy. This isn't some great dilemma, nor is this choice the pinnacle action of an overarching mystery that spanned the whole game. Cerberus are obviously angled to become an antagonist in Mass Effect 3. Only an idiot would give one enemy access to the very obviously more powerful enemy's stuff. And to top it all off, ultimately the choice is an illusion. Cerberus in Mass Effect 3 are the same either way. There are slight differences, but the advantage this actually gives Cerberus is rather negligible. Also, this choice doesn't really slot into deciding between what a Paragon or Renegade would do. Neither, based on the information we have, would be dumb enough to trust Cerberus. So this ultimate choice sadly falls flat because one of the options the game never bothers to make seem like a good idea. And that's a shame because the Elusive Man makes a great argument for why it shouldn't be blown up. Passing up on the opportunity to have Reaper technology could have dire consequences for the galaxy. Sadly, it's just too clear Cerberus having access to that tech poses the same threat, and there are no real mitigating factors in coming to that conclusion. Sure, they brought us back from the dead, but that is also a moral horror. There is no point where we see Cerberus do anything objectively good. The shady organization helps nobody. They're entirely obsessed with the future at the expense of the present, and time again we get to see proof that they are more akin to human Reapers than this monstrosity could ever be. So no, Bond villain in space, you are not getting the Collector base. As you can gather, this conclusion is fine. The thing I take issue with is how easy it is to come to. Had the Elusive Man been a greater mystery over the course of the entire game, something to unravel alongside recruiting the squad, gaining their loyalty and taking the fight to the Collectors, while we see his shifty organization perform a mixture of good deeds and bad ones, and leave the Cerberus reveal to be a mid to late game shock. It would either be so much more challenging to discern whether or not this guy is actually good, or coming to the conclusion that he couldn't be trusted would feel way more earned. The elusive man deserved way more of his potential to be realised in this game, because God knows Mass Effect 3 doesn't. Anyway, the Human Reaper larva appears to object to us blowing up their base, so we have to kill it again. I'm not sure what you want me to say about this. It dies again without too much fuss, you just have to shoot at its eyes for a bit, at which point it partially collapses onto the platform you're standing on, which I guess is yet another opportunity for squad mates whose loyalty you haven't got to die. But of course, they don't. I'm way too cool for that. I've played Mass Effect 2 far too many times, more times than I can count even. If I can't do a perfect run of this mission with my eyes closed, I am unworthy of the Garrus Vicarian body pillow. Yes, that's an actual piece of merchandise that exists. No, I don't own one. Yet. Once the Human Reaper is defeated and the platform we were standing on's taken its tumble, a final cutscene will play, confirming if anyone in our current squad has passed, and if anyone left behind to hold the line has. After which point, the cutscene will show Commander Shepard and the crew escaping the Collector base before it explodes. And while it has to be said this mission is the culmination of a narrative built at times on nonsense, it's incredibly satisfying to get it right. To pull off the impossible without as much as a scratch. We'll just ignore the hole in the Normandy's engineering bay. There's a sense of pride to take in the preparations you've made and the team of ragtag misfits you've put together, whose loyalties you've painstakingly acquired. Every piece of content you've engaged with in Mass Effect 2 feels worth it in this moment, because not only did you have to do all that, you also had to remain consistent, true to a set of values, be it Paragon or Renegade, and engage with enough of that to make your Commander Shepard an exemplar of those traits. For all its flaws, it is a dramatic, cinematic ending that tries something ambitious that in my opinion ultimately suits a game so dedicated to character work. Finally, for all his writing flaws, blowing up the Collector base to spite the elusive man is just as gratifying as doing it to save this galaxy. The word is spectacle, and Mass Effect 2's ending has it in abundance, from visuals to soundtrack and every single character who's made the journey worth it. However, what about the Reapers? Yeah, they're still coming. We've done nothing to address that all game. One of the final scenes in the story is Joker walking up to us and handing us a datapad with a bunch of Reaper diagrams on it, which we glance at for less than a few seconds before Shepard has a dramatic stare out the hole in engineering bay. And then we get a few menacing shots of the Reapers in insane numbers approaching the galaxy. We have done nothing to prepare for that. The credits may roll, but we are That is ultimately the most obvious problem when it comes to Mass Effect 2's overarching story. The Reapers' involvement, they are involved, don't get me wrong, but it feels negligible, and as a result, you can't help but feel as if it's all a bit of a distraction. This is Commander Shepard's final line in Mass Effect 1.
Sovereign was only a vanguard. The Reaper fleet is still coming. Hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. And I'm gonna find some way to stop them.
This is where we still are. The Collectors are only a vanguard compared to this backdrop of endless Reapers. When people say Mass Effect 2 is filler, this is primarily what they're talking about. The full-scale Reaper invasion come the end of the events of Mass Effect 2 is months away at most. In Mass Effect 1, we delayed it by a couple of years, even transformed the nature of it, as they'll now have to invade the galaxy from the outside in rather than the inside out. But in Mass Effect 2, we haven't considerably furthered our Reaper understanding, we haven't delayed them further yet. We'll get to that. All we've done is undo a devious little Reaper scheme that's about to stop mattering. And flicking the nose of the mustache-twirling elusive man, we've made powerful enemies and even more powerful friends, which does actually, in my mind, constitute a contribution. We have utilised the calm before the storm reasonably well. So, off the back of that, I feel Mass Effect 2 does actually do more than be a glorified side quest, but at the same time, I know where those complaints are coming from. The antagonist is very quiet in this game. Harbinger, a Reaper, does routinely take control of Collectors to goad you, but that too easily disappears into the noise of battle. It also tells us nothing we don't already know. The Human Reaper does tell us that they harvest races and turn them into more Reapers, and that tells us a fair bit within itself, but the Human Reaper isn't exactly in a position to tell us anything more. All we have to latch onto is the idea that the Reapers are a tad more sentimental than you would expect from apathetic metallic space gods, but that's not actually anything relevant to stopping them. If we cut out Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 1 would roll into Mass Effect 3 reasonably well. But this middle part contributes so much to the character department, to expanding characters we knew, and introducing us to new faces, expanding the lore of the universe. There is no denying that Mass Effect would be a far quieter universe were it not for this entry. So I think the issue is less the Reaper's very loose involvement, but rather how exposed that facet of the storytelling is, because the Cerberus angle is handled incredibly poorly. Imagining how the elusive man could be more enigmatic is fairly easy. You can spot the opportunities a mile away. The game just doesn't take them. There's room for nuance within Cerberus that isn't explored. As such, Commander Shepard's however uneasy alliance with them becomes nonsensical, when this perhaps should have been the true focus of the storytelling. Unlike many I've seen discussing it, I'm not going to take a shot at the ultimate idea, but the way Cerberus is worked into the story strips it of any mystery when it should be the biggest mystery. And I feel like, considering the grand mystery the Reapers were in Mass Effect 1, it's far too easy to misidentify them as the problem element. The disparity is far too easy to trace. This is a story about characters, about trust, about loyalty, and of course, leadership. It wants to remove us from the cosmic horror and tell us a human story. The stakes aren't as grand, but they do immediately threaten the friends we've made along the way. Morality plays the greatest thematic role here, as does individual sacrifice, and the notion of individuals unifying despite their differences to face a threat bigger than all of them. The elusive man isn't a bad idea, nor is he necessarily performed poorly by Martin Sheen, but the writing never lets him step into the role this kind of story was screaming for him to be. Instead, we get a character who never really falls into a box, and in my mind that's primarily because they try to put him in one way too early, rather than slowly and deliberately revealing the character and the organization he represents in stages that would allow us to consider the small picture before the big one. The other major problem I raise from Mass Effect 2's ending is just where do you go from here with these characters, considering any combination of them could die or could live? I'll have to save that for the Mass Effect 3 video, I suspect. Simply put, Mass Effect 2's ending is so ambitious that the consequences of it are felt to the fullest extent, for better or worse, in its sequel. So with everything wrapped up, the only thing left is to consider Mass Effect 2's de facto epilogue, Arrival, or as I like to call it, the main story DLC. Arrival is a peculiar, even polarizing expansion. You can find people who love it and people who hate it. I've come to the realization over the years that it really isn't that good. At some point about halfway through the main story, normally, while you're doing something entirely unrelated, you'll receive an emergency call from Admiral Hackett, who needs your help for a special secret assignment. Hackett is surprisingly absent in Mass Effect 2, considering in the first game he hails you so much, you wonder if you're the only person in the galaxy who can solve any of its problems. But at least this time he gets a face. He tells us we need to urgently rush to a Batarian system to rescue Dr. Kenson, whoever that is. It's weird that this call for help comes up halfway through a playthrough, but I think that's a byproduct of it being a DLC tacked on later, when of course it was intended to attach to playthroughs already completed at the time of installation. But to clarify, the events of this short expansion make the most sense to experience after the main story. Hackett is contacting us despite our alarming Cerberus affiliation because he needs this mission to be as quiet as possible. It's a bloody good job then that we've spent the entire game cultivating a team specifically to run a black operation. Of course, we can't take even them. The reasoning is pretty flimsy as far as I can see. EA weren't too keen on paying for all the actors to come back. So we go to Aratot to rescue Kenson alone, who of course is languishing in a Batarian prison. If you know anything about Batarians, they hate humans, and Kenson may very well be about to give them another reason to. I think the opening of this mission is trying to go for a stealth segment. It's very weird in a game that has no systems for it whatsoever. We have to fight our way through the odd Varren and solve the odd puzzle, but eventually we do happen upon the complex, where we'll off the odd Batarian, and eventually find Kenson, presently being interrogated in a torture chamber. So we rescue her, and on the journey back to her base in the system, we learn the reason for her arrest was she was planning to destroy this system's mass relay. Why? Because the Reapers are about to arrive, and once they hit a mass relay, they'll be in all corners of the galaxy. So in other words, we're on another mission to delay the arrival of the Reapers. It doesn't contribute huge amounts to the story, because delaying the arrival of the Reapers again is kind of funny when you think about it. And on top of that, I think it's intended to cure the absence of the Reapers in the main story of Mass Effect 2, which I would argue isn't actually the problem with Mass Effect 2's story. It only seems like it, which we've already explored. So to buy us a matter of months, Kenson and her science fellows plan to launch an asteroid into the mass relay and destroy it, which would by extension destroy the entire system, which is home to 300,000 Batarians. So, all things considered, it's a rather extreme plan. We arrive at the asteroid to discover we have just over 2 days left. However, rather predictably, because the DLC's only just started really, we discover the sensible scientists have been keeping a Reaper artifact out in the open. So, Object Rho has indoctrinated everybody aboard this station. We get a vision confirming the Reapers are in fact coming, and then everybody aboard the station becomes hostile towards us. There are 2 ways to pass the next segment of endless soldiers attacking us. One is to be killed, and the other is to wait for Object Rho to power up. Either way, we'll pass out and find ourselves as Kenson's prisoner. They keep us under sedatives for 2 days until, thanks to the magical plot armor, the sedatives stop working. So they lock us in a med bay, but little did they know they'd left the mech controls in here. So we play as a mech and rescue ourselves. Good on this DLC for introducing a bit of novel gameplay, but wow, that is very convenient. Anyway, now we have just under 2 hours until the Reaper's arrival. Yes, if you wait the clock down that plays in real time, the Reapers will arrive and the mission will fail. So it's advisable that you don't do that. Now we'll have to fight our way through the facility and activate the project launching the asteroid into the mass relay to destroy the system to prevent the Reapers from using the mass relay to access the entire galaxy. There's plenty of environmental stuff to soak in, and don't let that timer fool you. While it is a legitimate timer, you do have time. And it's pretty cool to see documentation of Dr. Kenson's mind slowly becoming overtaken by the Reaper's will. However, it doesn't necessarily tell us anything new, and that's an important thing to latch onto. Eventually, we come to the controls to activate the project, and it's here we're faced with a choice. Do we try to hail the Normandy and save ourselves, or do we try to contact the Batarian colony of 300,000 people and encourage them to evacuate? The choice won't matter either way. After we've activated the project, Shepard will try to do whichever, and Kenson will get in the way of that. So the Batarians are doomed either way, and you don't really make any meaningful choices in this DLC. Then we'll have to do more fighting, find Kenson, kill Kenson, get blown up a bit, which knocks us out again, and then come to even closer to the arrival of the Reapers and now this asteroid's collision with the mass relay, at which point our mission is to escape this hurtling asteroid and jump through the mass relay before it is destroyed. We do this by trying to hail the Normandy again, except this time our communication is interrupted by a Reaper, Harbinger, who tells us that the Reapers are very annoyed with our behaviour, before embarking on yet another tirade of taunts, where we're told we're fighting against the inevitable. I like the sense of occasion to it, but if you pay attention to any of the dialogue, none of it really adds up to anything. This is the sovereign conversation from Mass Effect 1 minus any exchange of information. So I get that this expansion is intended to add Reaper substance to Mass Effect 2, which is known for lacking it, but to be honest, if you had this Leviathan of a galactic presence, this horror beyond horrors, wouldn't it be reasonable to say that unnecessary superfluous screen time would be counterproductive to a point? I get the idea you want them to have a presence, but the Reaper's biggest fear factor has always been the idea of them. So every time one is actually physically placed in front of us, it's either going to play on very specific things or it runs the risk of becoming a bit funny. Here it is just a bit funny. Then the Normandy shows up and we're rescued by not Joker.
Commander Shepard, Normandy inbound for pickup.
Then we jump aboard and bomb it out of the system, just in time to watch it blow up. A cinematic treat to conclude our Mass Effect 2 run, there's no denying that. But the mass relay's explosion, of course, blows up the entire system, and we've just been railroaded into committing genocide against over 300,000 Batarians to buy ourselves a few months before the Reapers show up. At this point in the storytelling, players should be eager to fight the Reapers directly, so while I understand that this trade-off is setting up Mass Effect 3, the necessity of it is hard to balance, and the daftness is kind of left exposed, with the icing on the cake being Admiral Hackett won't even want to see our report. He trusts us, even though we've just contributed to the deaths of 300,000 Batarians. Then he gives us a snippet of what awaits us at the beginning of Mass Effect 3. We're going to have to stand trial for this as if our brief stint in a terrorist organization wasn't treason enough. Ultimately, the Arrival DLC is a short one, and it doesn't really have the time to explore itself in a way that would be coherent. It relies on shortcuts that would manifest as plot armor and character stupidity, and ultimately is trying to address a symptom to a problem Mass Effect 2 has rather than a problem it has. It's very poor in my opinion, but I won't let it get in the way of the rest of the game. To conclude this long, probably a bit painful bit of video, no, I don't think Mass Effect 2 is a bad game actually, because it's not that. It's a really good game, exceptional even. The character work is sensational. Every individual, barring maybe Jacob, feels fleshed out and has a satisfying arc, and you can understand why they joined this insane escapade. And that character core does so much heavy lifting. As for the elusive man, I find him to be a big missed opportunity for an enigmatic human threat to slowly reveal itself over the course of the story, and we're left with the knowledge they'll betray us eventually from more or less jump. The Reapers are almost entirely absent, and the Collector threat is quite unimpressive against the cosmic horror so expertly weaved into the first game. But I think that both of those things would have felt less out of sorts had the writing regarding Cerberus been handled with more mystery and nuance. As for the gameplay, Mass Effect 2 was a total overhaul. The shooting has improved, the RPG-isms that got in the way of Mass Effect 1 are gone. But so are the parts of the game that allowed me to embed myself in this world to the fullest extent of both extremes, the warm, fuzzy galaxy and the silence of cosmic insignificance. Instead, it shows us a darker, seedier side to the galaxy, which of course brought its own value. Then of course, Mass Effect 2's ambitious finale ultimately was incredible, but it boxed Mass Effect 3 into a corner. The character work that defines this title can result in so many variations that no doubt writing the characters in this game to be significant in the next would have been a nightmare, but we'll save it for the Mass Effect 3 video to truly dive into that. Ultimately, Mass Effect 2 is still great. It contributes so much to the lore and world building and boasts an entirely different set of strengths to its predecessor, many of which the series overall is beloved for in retrospect. It will never be bad, actually. It's always going to be a great, wild ride you experience again and again until the point where you're making the exact same choices and doing the exact same things in the exact same order. That's nothing short of a testament to its brilliance. But, yes, it's probably not the strongest of sequels Mass Effect 1 could have had. In that respect, it's very, very weird. So I bring this video to its much anticipated end. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It will be massively appreciated. And if you fancy joining our Discord server, be sure to do so via the QR code on screen now. If not, no worries, it's up to you. But now I shall leave you, so with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care, and goodbye.